Right. Hi there, everybody. Graham Fletcher here from Awaken Your Highest Self. I'm here with the lovely Dan Mangum, who's in America. You'll have to remind me of the location, Dan.
I'm in Washington State.
Lovely. And we're going this is like a follow-up to some of the interviews we've had before, but Dan was interested in chatting about a specific area of interest he has called physical radiesthesia. Is that the right pronunciation or?
Yes.
Lovely. Oh, yeah. So I'm all yours, Dan. If you would like to sort of take us in on a continuation from where we were chatting before, that would be lovely to find out more.
Okay. So the term radiesthesia is kind of a broad term. It can mean a lot of things, but it's radiesthesia is you're working with your own energy field somehow in detecting or projecting or working with energies. Like if you use a paper radionic instrument, like just a radionic diagram, which will do things like a radionic instrument will use. That's actually radiesthesia, not radionics, because you're using your energy field with that. Whereas with a radionic instrument, you're using the instrument itself has its own power. So that's one form of radiesthesia. And what I want to get into is the difference between this type of radiesthesia and dowsing because it's related, but they're not the same thing, despite the fact that with this physical radiesthesia, or sometimes it's also called vibratory radiesthesia, and I actually think that's kind of a better name, but it's more accurate description of what's going on. But you're using pendulums, but the difference is, one of the differences is with dowsing. Like this is my dowsing pendulum. It's a Mori pendulum with a swivel on it, stainless steel. I like heavy pendulums so I can feel it moving. For something like for dowsing, this is just an interface between you and your subconscious or the superconscious or however you want to look at it that gives you the answers. And you program your mind to say this is the search position, this is yes or whatever. This doesn't really matter. I mean, you could use a piece of string and a hex nut and get the same results.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing special about this. It's just an interface, an indicator.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with the radiesthesia pendulums, like here's one, for example. People, if you've heard of any of this, you may have seen one of these. This is called the virtual cone pendulum.
Okay. I haven't seen that before.
And this disc moves up and down.
Right.
And you're with these things, you're calibrating them. Like right now, it's set for a particular color band. We'll go into more of this later.
Yeah.
And it has to do with the angle between the disc and the and the top and the disc and the bottom. If you change this, you change the angle. Now you're changing the energy band that you're trying to detect.
Okay.
And then there's also things with some of them with you holding it a specific string length. Okay, so and you don't need to do any of that with a dowsing pendulum, but these things are calibrated with settings on the pendulum and string length and things.
Okay.
So that tells you how you calibrate it tells you which energy band you're looking for or you're going to work with. And like I didn't realize there was a difference that when I got into radionics, because that's how I got into dowsing. It's like if you're using an L rod, like one of the early things I learned, you can use L rods to detect the Hartman lines and the Curry lines.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things I read or heard from people is like you're just walking along and you're feeling, and when the energy is there, it moves the L rod to show you now you've found the line.
Right.
If you're doing that, that's radiesthesia.
Right.
If you're holding the L rod and you're asking a mental question, tell it, show me when I cross, the line, that's dowsing.
Right.
It looks the same, but it's two different things.
Okay.
In dowsing, you're asking mental questions.
Yeah.
In physical radiesthesia, your mind is clear. You're not asking any questions. There's no questions in your mind. You're not asking things like that. It's a different skill.
Okay.
And so I want to separate that, because it's not something that's taught. I don't think most people even realize there's a difference, but there is. It's two separate skills. And in the past, people knew that, but it's, how things, information gets lost as time goes on sometimes.
Sure.
And like water witching, the willow branch, you hold it and you just walk along. That's actually radiesthesia. That's not dowsing, because you're just letting, the willow has a lot of moisture and it's reacting with the energy of the line and everything like that, finding those lines. That's actually radiesthesia. So that's the difference. With radiesthesia, you're working with your energy field, and that's how these pendulums work. It's working with your energy field in a way, whereas dowsing, you're just asking questions, and they're two different skills. And in some things, dowsing's better. These skills aren't good for certain things, but they're also better than, the other things than dowsing is. They're complementary skills. And the Frenchmen we're going to talk about who discovered this, they were dowsers too. They were conventional dowsing. And sometimes in these circles, when you're talking about just dowsing, it's called mental dowsing sometimes.
Okay.
Just to make sure you specify and you know what we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
So in the early part of the 20th century, there was these Frenchmen, and they weren't all working together at the same time, but they kind of, in the same era, working and building on each other's work and things. They had learned this idea of radiesthesia from some Jesuits, and they began to investigate it. And like the first ones you typically talk about are Leon Chameray and Andre de Belizal. And Chameray was an engineer, and de Belizal was a physician. So they were scientists, and they viewed this work that they were doing as science. And they fully expected the scientific community to embrace their work, and the scientific community did not. They rejected it. And these guys and some of the other guys, they were disappointed. Okay. They did that, but these guys had a scientific mind, despite the fact they were dowsers, they were also scientists. But Chameray and de Belizal were doing the big work at the beginning, and discovering that there's these subtle energies present, and there's a whole spectrum of them. And each of the different bands of this spectrum of subtle energies has different properties. And they also were, I don't remember if they were the ones who discovered it, was some of the later ones discovered that these energies are polarized. This whole spectrum of energies, they're named after colors, because they had to name them after something. And there are two forms of each energy. There's a horizontal propagation, what they call the horizontal wave, and there's a vertical wave. So each color band has the horizontal aspect and the vertical aspect, and either could be present or both could be present whenever you're detecting something. The horizontal bands are healthy and they're life affirming. The vertical bands are not healthy and they're not life affirming. And that doesn't mean they're evil. It just means that they're part of the nature. That just means they're not good for you to be around for most life forms. There are some, like some insects, actually seek to be around some of the vertical energies. But it's just, like if you go into I look at it this way. If you go into the caldera of a volcano, there's a lot of gases in there that are heavier than air that will suffocate you, and the heat can burn you, and there could be poison fumes. That's not an evil place. It's just not healthy for our type of life form to be there. And that's kind of view these energies. And they didn't, at first they didn't realize there was these two aspects of the energy, but they figured it out. They took them, these two guys and some other researchers like Jean Delafoy and Louis Turin, and there was a Russian guy who we only know him as Colonel Skaryatin, or his pen name of NL. That's all we really know about him. He did some work on here too, and they slowly put all the pieces together over years and a couple decades to get to where we know about it now. But we didn't know all of it right away. Okay. But and one of the things they discovered also is that our ancestors, these ancient cultures, these people were aware of these energies and they used them. Right. Easter Island, China, Egypt, the Egyptians definitely, big time. Lots of places knew about them. And they did things to cultivate things or to protect against them. And we can go into some of that. It's pretty interesting. Mm. And then after, more recently, there was another discovery added to it by a man named Dr. Ibrahim Karim, who's an Egyptian architect, and he created and founded the science of biogeometry, which, you may have heard of, I don't know. But he discovered that there is a 13th energy with this spectrum, and that 13th energy is non-polarized, so there's no horizontal or vertical aspect to it. It's a centering energy, it's a balancing energy. It's the energy you find at all the power spots where all the grid lines and the ley lines and everything cross, what they build all the temples on.
Okay.
That energy that you always find on those points, that's the BG, what he calls the BG3 energy. He calls it BG3. It's short for biogeometry 3 because there's 3 aspects to it from these color bands, actually little sub bands of these color bands that are present there when that energy is present. So he calls it BG3. It's also sometimes in other places called the centering energy because because it balances and centers things, and you'll find it at the center of a circle. And all of these things, these energies, sometimes they're called the shape-caused wave because shapes will cause these things to emit. Angles, ratios, musical notes, colors, all sorts of things will have these energies associated with them. And even though these color bands, this spectrum of subtle energy is named after colors, they're not limited to colors. There's like the red band, for example, is not just the color red. The color red is part of what's called the red band. There's more to it than just the color red.
Okay.
And and Dr. Karim took biogeometry in a specific direction. It uses radiesthesia, but he doesn't work too much. Biogeometry doesn't deal too much specifically with the color bands other than one particular one is called the vertical wave of negative green. That is the most dangerous of the vertical waves, and it's also the most common. And biogeometry is basically looking to get, to balance out that and the other vertical waves and promote as much BG3 energy in the environment as possible. So he kind of took it in his work in a specific route, but he learned all about the Frenchmen and all the work and everything they did, in the course of developing biogeometry.
Mm-hmm.
And I have taken biogeometry classes. That's part of how we'll learn some of this. These Frenchmen, they wrote some books. There is no public translation of these books in English. There is one private translation. I came across a woman who did at least some of them. I don't think she did all of them, but she did some of them. I've heard of another private translation, but I've never seen it anywhere. Don't know who did it or where to get a hold of it. Because again, you just have to stumble on the person to be able to get them. But they are available in French. If you can read French, it's pretty easy. And apparently Dr. Karim can speak multiple languages, including French, so he didn't have any trouble reading these books. But yeah, the spectrum, they named it after colors, and they arranged it in a circle. Well, usually we arrange it in a circle. They had some of these guys, some had different ways, so like in in 3/4 of a circle, and they had them in degrees, and they had different ways they looked at it. But the easiest way to look at it is just in a circle. With green at the top, and it goes in order: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. And then after that, they named it ultraviolet, white, negative green, black, infrared, and then back to red and back around. That's how these colors were named. Negative green is not the best name for that, but that's what they chose. It's the most common name. Some people tried to call it radiesthesia gray for a while, but that didn't really pick up. Negative green just means it's the opposite of green. It's on the opposite side of the circle. Negative in that sense doesn't mean bad. It just means the opposite, they had to call it something. A lot of people kind of wish they would have picked a different name for it, but because it gets confusing, because you have horizontal negative green and you have vertical negative green. Horizontal negative green is is healthy, it's safe, it has a lot of positive aspects to it. Vertical negative green, as I said, is very dangerous. It's the most dangerous of all of them, and it's also, for whatever reason, it's the most common.
Okay.
Some of these are very rare, you'll hardly ever see them, but you hear negative and people think that negative green is always bad, and there are people out there on the internet where you see that the negative green energy is bad. Well, the vertical aspect of negative green is bad. The horizontal aspect is actually good. It's actually helpful. But you find it opposite green. And it's interesting, one of the things, if you just draw a circle on a piece of paper or in the dirt, and you take one of these pendulums, you can set it for green, say, and go around the circle and look for green, and you'll find green coming out of part of the circle, and that circle will be pointing north, always.
Okay.
Actually, magnetic north, really, but that's magnetic north every time.
Wow.
It'll always be that way. And then, right on the opposite side of the circle, that'll be where negative green is, and you can lay the whole spectrum out that way. So that's one of the things they discovered. And then they began to investigate like some of the properties of these colors and what they do and where they're found. Like clean potable water will be radiating horizontal blue. Okay. Or if it's got a lot of minerals, maybe horizontal indigo. If it's got chemical contamination, I think you'll radiate vertical negative green and maybe vertical orange. I think I'd have to look. Yellow jackets, when they make their nest, they will always make their nest. Wherever they make their nest, there's vertical negative green there.
Okay.
Because they're one of the insects that can do well in that type of energy. And you'll also find very often ant hills will be on a spot of vertical negative green. Okay. Or termite mounds.
Right.
In fact, like termites in nature, the termite's job is to break down decaying wood. That's what they do. And some ants do that too, and other insects. A decaying log will radiate vertical negative green because it's got that energy of decay. That's one of the things it's doing. Negative green, it's breaking things down. Right. And the vertical aspect of it is sending it away from the physical plane back to the spiritual realm or bringing something in like that. Okay. Whereas the horizontal waves are spreading things out across the physical world. That's one way you can think of it. So, but like these insect mounds, like ants and termites, they'll very often be there. Yellow jackets will always make their nest in an area of vertical negative green because it doesn't harm them. And one of the things I've discovered, because I had a bad year of yellow jackets, a handful of years ago. The location they build it will always have vertical negative green, but the nest that yellow jackets build, if you take it out of that location, and you can check it anywhere, the nest itself radiates vertical red. Okay. And if you know anything about the color red, one of the aspects of the things that red has, some of the negative aspects, is like anger and aggression, things like that. I don't know what kind of yellow jackets, if you have them in Wales, yellow jackets, those things are violent and aggressive. Those things are mean. They will chase you. Like people run from yellow jackets, they disturb a nest, they'll dive in water, and the yellow jackets will wait for you to come out.
Right. Wow.
And it's no surprise that the nest that they live in creates an energy that radiates anger and aggression.
Wow.
Look at other types of things like paper wasps or other things like that. They're not that aggressive, but yellow jackets are. And it's because they live in their home radiates that energy for whatever reason. It's just interesting.
Wow, man.
Honeybees, their honeybee comb will radiate horizontal yellow, which is a very peaceful, calming color that you'll find in a lot of the old cathedrals and churches.
Right.
And honeybees are not aggressive. Even if you disturb, they'll come at you if you disturb the nest, but other than that, they're pretty nice. So it's things like that is pretty interesting. I've also found that bumblebees, if you find a bumblebee nest, you'll find I think it's violet and ultraviolet, horizontal violet and ultraviolet there. So it's just there are things like that. I mean, I haven't investigated everything, but that's how it works. You know, you'll find things like that. Like another interesting thing about animals is cats will often curl up on a spot where there's negative green, vertical negative green, because it doesn't seem to harm them. We're not sure if it doesn't harm them or if it's the fact that they purr and the purr counterbalances it. Because there's a
Right.
lot of interesting properties to the sound of a cat purring. But yeah, they don't seem to be harmed. And they'll very often, if you find them curled up purring somewhere, oftentimes there'll be a vertical negative green there.
Oh,
I think I think the purring is balancing that. Um, and then as far as our like the ancient cultures went, um, they discovered a lot of things there. Like there's famous drawings, you know, and photographs of stuff they found in Egypt. Like there's a table with what they call the canopic jars, you know, where the mummy had the organs that they kept and preserved. They would put them in the jars, and they're decorated a certain way, and they're set in underneath the table, and then there's a top of the table. You may have seen it if you watch the movie The Mummy in the 90s with Brendan Fraser. They recreated it. That's what those is. That table is normal if as long as those jars are in the right place. If you take those jars off or disturb the jars out of where the Egyptians set them, that table radiates a strong emanation of vertical negative green, which may be part of what people call the mummy's curse or whatever. If you disturb that, you know, you're disturbing energies, and, you know, and you're being
okay.
affected by it.
Yeah, that would make sense.
The vertical negative green, it like I said, it's the the health risks of it depend on your exposure time and how strong it is. But Leon Chameray died from exposure to it. They found him in this lab one day because they didn't know at that point that there was a horizontal and vertical wave, and the horizontal ones were dangerous.
Right.
And he was experimenting, generating large amounts of vertical negative green, and it mummified him. He was mummified. And it's interesting because that's one of the properties of both the horizontal and the vertical aspect. It can dehydrate. And if you notice, if you've ever heard, like in the Great Pyramid, in what they call the King's Chamber, which, you know, it's not a tomb. They didn't bury the pharaoh there, but that's what we call it, you know, the King's Chamber. Like they found, like if the custodians there, the people there, they find dead animals like rats or something, they just throw them in the garbage can because they just mummify. They just dry out and mummify. They don't rot and putrefy because that chamber is filled with negative green, horizontal negative green. In that case, there's no vertical negative green there.
Right.
But that's an aspect of negative green, both horizontal and vertical.
Okay.
It'll mummify that. So he died, and that's when they started to realize there's something more they need to investigate.
Okay.
And but I think that's maybe part of the mummy's curse. And if you've ever you know about Howard Carter, the guy who explored King Tut's tomb.
I think I vaguely know the name. You might need to refresh my memory, but
Yeah, he's the leader of the expedition. They found King Tut's tomb. They went in there, and then everybody but Howard Carter got sick or had horrible things happen to them.
right.
Everybody except Howard Carter. What is not commonly known is that somebody, before he went in there, gave Howard Carter a ring,
Ah,
and the ring had a design on it. And I can show you the design, I think, here. I think I got it. Maybe I don't. Maybe I got the wrong book here. Let's see. Yeah, well, here we go. It looks like this. Can you see that?
yeah, I can, yeah.
It's called the Atlantis symbol,
Okay.
and you find it on the Atlantis. You can buy rings and pendants with it now. The story was at the time was that symbol comes from Atlantis, and they said it will protect you from what's in there. And he wore the ring, and nothing bad happened to him, but bad things happened to everybody else that went in there.
Wow.
So there's that. There's a table. There's some other table they found that radiates a strong horizontal blue, so you could like put water vessels on it and keep the water clean and fresh and drinkable. So there's things like that there. In like one one of the things that will generate the negative green is like a peaked roof like this. You'll get negative green coming down, vertical negative green. But you don't have to do much to stop that. Like a little spike or spire on the top, or like in China and Japan, they have a lot of those roofs, but along the end they have those little decorations. Just something like that will stop that. It doesn't take much necessarily. So maybe it's a coincidence, but in the world, in the ancient world, you don't find these buildings they have emitting these dangerous energies. Domes, a perfect dome, a perfect hemisphere will radiate vertical negative green down. But you'll notice in the ancient world, all the domes and things, they all have a spire on top, or it's not a perfect hemisphere. They extend it down a little bit. You do that, now there's no more negative green coming up. So they knew something. They knew, even if it was a different perspective, they knew to do certain things and not to do certain things because of the energy. On Easter Island. Oh, I got to plug my computer in here. My battery's going to run out. Should have checked that before we started here. Okay. So on Easter Island, you have the big statues. They're massive. Those statues radiate very strong vertical negative green. And one of the things that increases the strength of any of these energies is the mass of the object radiating it. That's one of the things that can affect it. Those statues weigh tons. They're huge. They're not just heads. Most of them are bodies buried in the ground.
Yeah.
And they're radiating that outward. When they're on the edge of the island, they're radiating it outward. And we think that was a protection to try to, like invaders, if anybody was coming, they'd have to come through that energy and make them weak and sick before they got here. But it radiated it some into the island too. And they found a whole bunch of little necklaces with all these symbols on it. And those necklaces will mitigate the effects of the negative green, but it was so strong that those necklaces got saturated and it stopped protecting the people.
Okay.
And then the civilization, those people, the environment died and they went crazy and they were eating each other and all sorts of stuff like that, so. But yeah, those statues emit that. It's, so there's a lot of things like that they've discovered in the ancient world. So these people knew about that. And the one of the things we can get into a little bit later with Jean de la Foy is on Easter Island, all those symbols, there's a weird language that nobody understands because all the people that spoke it died and nobody knows what it is.
Okay.
And most of them are little figures, look like figures of people and things like that. And there's a few other symbols there in there too. All of each of those symbols, they radiate one of these colors.
Right.
And some of them radiate the horizontal, some of them radiate the vertical. It's kind of interesting, So there's things like that. And I just found this to be fascinating. When I first heard about this, it was like really grabbed me, and I wanted to read about this and learn about this. And it's taken a while to put together all this information, from sources. There's little bits and pieces on the internet, but it's really interesting. And some of these guys got into work with health,
Right.
Because there are colors associated with diseases like cancer. It'll have vertical negative green and or vertical black associated with it.
Okay.
And then other diseases, like the diseases of their time, they were doing tuberculosis and scarlet fever, there's a lot of diseases we don't deal with now, but they had figured out, if you can check for these energies, and that's can be indicative of certain disease conditions. So it was, and then some of them, they were doing work with that. They were doing work healing people, because these, like this, you can use this to emit that energy too. And they built other tools to emit the energies, and there's ways to do it. But you can emit the opposite energy, to counterbalance the negative energy, and they were working with, healing people with that. So they were doing a lot of things. It was, and then let's see, Inel, the Russian guy, Colonel Skaryatin, he was a little bit more spiritual and mystical. He kind of started to take some of his research in that direction. One of them, I can forget who now. One of them was really kind of was interested in color therapy. So I think he was doing more of a lot of the healing, because color therapy was already a thing by this time, because Dinshaw Gadiali had already been doing his work with color therapy and things like that. So color therapy was known, but he was taking it in that direction. So different people were kind of taking this work in different ways. And I've done some research and taken it in different places, like with the yellow jackets and the bees and stuff like that. I've done some investigation with shapes. Like I've played around with the Atlantis symbol, and it does emit what Dr. Kareem calls the BG3 energy. It emits some of the other colors out of the ends and things like that. It's pretty interesting. The Ankh, that's a very powerful symbol. There's horizontal negative green coming out the bottom and green coming out the top, and red and violet coming out the sides, things like that. I haven't done much with it, but that radiates a lot of these different color spectrum energies, the Bagua. The Tree of Life, you'll find a lot of a lot of energies on that. So there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things you can look at. A lot of things you can investigate and see. Now the vertical negative green, I think it's the most common because of the modern world. A lot of things emit it. The biggest thing in the modern world that emits it is the electric system.
Okay.
The 50 to 60 hertz, 120, 240 volt electrical system radiates large amounts of vertical negative green. Petrochemicals also will emit that. Nuclear power, nuclear materials, radioactive materials, that emits it. Certain emotional states, like you'll find some of that and some other vertical waves in like prisons, that aren't really great places.
Yeah.
But and that contaminates the grid, the Hartman line and the Curie lines, because those lines run everywhere. So they run through power substations, they run through nuclear power plants, they run through petroleum refineries, and then they just carry that energy on and spread it around. So it's kind of a big thing, and with cell phone signals and radio waves and now they got Starlink satellites with 5G, radiating everything. So that's just creating more of this energy. And it's, that's by far the most common one, And like I said, some of these energies you won't hardly ever encounter. Certain colors, like indigo is the rarest color. Horizontal or vertical, there's very rarely will you come across indigo. But it's just like in nature, that's the rarest color in nature.
Yeah.
I
would have thought 5G towers would probably emit them as well, perhaps.
Yeah, anything with electromagnetic radiation emits vertical negative green. In some cases, other vertical colors too. I think electricity in general has, I think, vertical red also.
Okay.
But yeah, cell towers, yep, cell phones, routers, all that stuff. It all radiates vertical negative green.
Okay.
And going back to the pyramid shapes, just like hemispheres, pyramids emit it.
Yeah.
But there's a way to counteract that. There's numerous ways to counteract it. One of those ways is like the Great Pyramid. It's indented. I don't know if you've heard about that. I'm
just going to let you know we've got less than a minute, so we might need to think about that, having a bit of a pause in a minute and then go.
Okay, yeah, we can do that. Yeah. But the Great Pyramid, they discovered it's indented. Each face is indented down the center. You can't see it from the ground. You can only see it from the air.
Okay.
But that creates a line down the center of each face. That eliminates the vertical negative green. Okay. So those people there's a reason they did that. They didn't just.
Let's pause it there and we'll come back so that